Right guys, imagine coming home late at night and you put the key into the door of your house only to find the key is not going into the lock the way it normally does. What would you do? You might take out your phone, you might shine this torch on your lock just to see what's going on, only to find that the barrel is now different. It's a brand new lock. Your locks have been changed while you were at work. No notice, no heads up, nothing. So you pick up the phone to call your landlord, find out what's going on, only to find your number has been blocked. Now, as crazy as this story sounds, it actually features in the front page of the Irish Times this morning. The actions of this particular landlord earned him an €8,000 fine in damages for what was described as an egregious breach of the rental laws. So this story got me thinking that the changes that were introduced to the rental market on the 1st of March this year, with all of these changes, I should probably make a video that just outlines what a landlord can and cannot do in 2026. I posted this video to my Instagram and TikTok in July last year, and that video got over 3.5 million views across the two platforms. It seems anything that affects the rental market is pretty topical and it garners a lot of interest. Now, I'll cover in a separate video the impact of those particular changes that came into force in March. But today I just want to cover what is and is not permitted under the Residential Tenancies Act. The Residential Tenancies Act of 2004, now 22 years old, it was introduced during the Celtic Tiger years. It was a couple of years before the crash, and there had been a bit of friction building in the market between landlords and tenant. There was no rules and landlords could shoot up rents whenever they felt like it. So the idea was to introduce this bill, and it was going to regulate the market better. It was going to put some rights and obligations on both the tenant and the landlord. As part of that, it established the Residential Tenancies Board, and the RTB is now what controls and monitors these laws. So the obligations on the landlord. The landlord must register every tenancy with the RTB. They must maintain the property in good structural repair and meet minimum standards. They must return the deposit promptly at the end of the lease unless there is a valid deduction. They must give the tenant quiet enjoyment of the property, and that means no unilateral lockouts, no cutting of the electricity, and no entry without notice. The landlord must give the tenant a statutory notice period when terminating a tenancy. The landlord must send any rent review notice to the tenant and the RTB on the same day. If they don't do that, the rent review is invalid. Now, in 2026, in March of this year, new rules were also introduced. The biggest of them all is the 6-year Tenancy of Minimum Duration, known as the TMD. Under these new rules, there are two categories of landlord. Category 1 is the small landlord of 1 to 3 properties. They are permitted to evict the tenant if they're selling the property. They can also evict the tenant if they need to put a family member into the property, and they can evict the tenant on grounds of financial hardship. But in all cases, they are subject to the notice period. Large landlords, it's a different category now. Large landlords are anybody with 4 or more. Now that's kind of controversial because 4 properties or 5 properties, you're in the same category as the guys with 100 properties. In those situations, you cannot terminate the tenancy for any reason such as sale, renovation, change of use. The only thing that gives you the right to terminate the tenancy is in the case of a breach of the terms of the lease agreement. In other words, it is the end of the no-fault eviction for large landlords. Now, the landlord has the following rights. The landlord has the right to receive the rent on time. The landlord has the right to recover any arrears through the RTB. The landlord has the right to terminate the tenancy for breach of agreement, arrears of rent, antisocial behaviour or damage to the property, and that is regardless of landlord size. The landlord has the right to access the dwelling for inspection and repair, however it is subject to proper notice. Changes introduced in 2026 are that the landlord can now reset the rent to the market value in certain circumstances. Number 1, when the tenant leaves voluntarily. If the tenant has been forced out, you lose the right to reset. Number 2, breach of agreement. If the tenant is in breach of the lease agreement terms, you can evict them and you can reset the rent to the market level. 3, at the end of a 6-year tenancy of minimum duration, as long as it's clean, you can go and reset the rent. 4 would be after a qualifying period of vacancy. Or 5, following substantial change to the property. Now that can take 2 forms. 1, physical change. In other words, if you were to renovate the property or extend it, change, rooms in some shape or form. The other way is to impact the energy performance of the building. All properties have a BE or a building energy rating. If you improve the building energy rating, if you bring it from say a D up to a B, that would be deemed sufficient change in order to reset to market value. And an important final right that was introduced in 2026 was the right to access for the purposes connected to the sale or transfer of the dwelling. So the landlord, if he's selling the property and needs an agent to show it around or something, it is now within the right of the landlord, subject to some notice, to be able to go and do that. Now, the tenant also has some obligations that they have to fulfill. Number 1, they must pay the rent on time. Number 2, they must keep the property in good condition. Leaving wear and tear aside, good condition is important. They cannot sublet or assign the lease to somebody else without the express consent of the landlord. And they have to give proper notice at the end of the tenancy. In the same way the landlord has to give you notice, it's the same on the other side. You have to give the landlord notice that you're planning on leaving. Now, the tenant also has some rights in the same way as the landlord. The biggest one obviously is the right to a minimum tenancy of 6 years now. That is from the 1st of March this year. They're also protected from no-fault evictions when the landlord is in the 4+ category. They're also protected from rent increases of more than 2% a year, or the lower if it's inflation. And by the way, that rule is now nationwide. The amendments to the 2026 Act, they brought them in. They did away with the RPZ, which were specific areas, the rental pressure zones, and it is now a nationwide rent control. And finally, you have the right to bring your dispute with the landlord to the RTB. Based on the rights and obligations of the landlords and the tenants, let's now review this case that we started with, €8,000 in damages that was awarded to the tenant. Number 1, he came home to find the locks had been changed with no notice. That's a breach. Number 2, the landlord had turned off the electricity in an attempt to coerce the tenant to move out. That's a breach for sure. And then a third one that was mentioned in the case was that the tenant could not contact the landlord by telephone any longer because his number was blocked. So he wrote a letter to the landlord seeking to recover his belongings from the apartment. And then he arrived in the evening to collect his belongings. There were 3 men sitting in the property in the dark because the electricity was gone. And he felt the purpose of that was just to intimidate him and make him leave as quickly as possible. So the tenant ended up sleeping on the floor of a friend for about a month. I think the RTB were right in calling this an egregious breach of the rules. Now, I gotta say, landlords get a pretty bad rap. I read the comments in my videos and it can be pretty anti-landlord out there. I just want to finish today's video on a story that does not paint landlords in such a bad light. I want to tell about my experience as a tenant. After 2008, I went through my own financial difficulties and I had to move into rented accommodation for a number of years. I found a property I really liked, contacted the landlord through their agent. They were extremely accommodating. In the 7 years that I lived in that property, they never increased the rent once. They replaced the appliances and repairs anytime that it was required. And I lived there in quiet enjoyment for the entire 7 years. My daughter was born and grew up there at the house, and she made friends with the next door neighbours. When we eventually bought our own house and moved out, we were sad to leave the area. We had built up some great friends and stuff in that area. I went and I met the landlord on the last day and I gave them a couple of bottles of wine and a thank you note. And that's how I think it should be. A landlord and tenant, it does not have to be a relationship that is based on friction. It can be based on mutual respect and you can enjoy one another. It can be a win-win, in other words. So guys, that's it. If you're thinking about scaling a property portfolio, then be sure to subscribe for more videos like this. And if you're interested in coaching or mentoring with me, just click on the Learn More link down in the description and it'll tell you whatever information you need. Guys, I'll see you in the next one.